Senate will come to order. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, La Mantilla, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwertner, Sparks, Springer, West, Whitmire, Zaffarini.
A quorum is present. Please rise for an invocation to be delivered by Pastor Mark Detman of Midland, Texas.
If y'all will join me in prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and for this opportunity to gather together in our state's capital. Thank you for the men and women who give of their time and talents to serve the citizens of the state of Texas. Father, as we go about the business of our government and in our daily lives, let us remember the grace and love which you have so freely given us, and let us practice that same grace and love with one another. Father, may your blessings abound upon the men and women in this chamber and in our capital. Grant them wisdom in their duties, courage to do what is right, and peace with the decisions they make. And may you be with the members of our military, our law enforcement, our first responders, and all of the people of this great state. May you guard our hearts and our minds as we work together to keep Texas the shining example of your great gifts. I pray all of these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Detman. The Dean of the Senate moves to excuse Senator West on account of the death in the family. Is there an objection? Chair hears none. The motion is adopted. The Dean of the Senate moves to dispense of the reading of yesterday's journal. Is there an objection? Chair hears none. The motion is adopted. Chair recognizes Senator Kokhorst to introduce the Doctor of the Day.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members and guests in the gallery. It is my absolute honor to recognize the Doctor of the Day, Dr. Pamela Chung, who has joined us here in the Capitol. Dr. Pamela Chung received her medical degree from McMaster University School of Medicine in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. She then completed her residency training at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, where she later taught in the Family Medicine Department. Board certified in Family Medicine by the American Board of Family Medicine and a certificate of the College of Family Physicians of Canada, Dr. Chung has clinical interests that center on child care and pediatrics, chronic disease management, depression, anxiety, and palliative care. She speaks basic French and treats patients of all ages. Thank you for joining us here today, Dr. Chung, and for your work that you're doing in our great state. And we wish you blessings, and we look forward to having you come back often. Thank you.
Members, may I have your attention? Take your seats for memorial resolution. We're having a memorial resolution. Chair lays out the following resolution. The Secretary will read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 378 by Alvarado et al. Whereas residents of Harris County lost an esteemed public servant with the passing of Deputy Sheriff Darren Almendarez on March 31st, 2022 at the age of 51. And whereas a native of Houston, Darren Almendarez was born to Mary Helen Martinez and Abraham Almendarez Sr. on August 15, 1970, and he grew up with 5 sisters and 4 brothers. He shared a rewarding marriage with Flor M. Zarzosa Almendarez, and he was the proud father of 3 children, Andrea Almendarez, Kayla Rios, and Danny Rios. And whereas after graduating from Austin High School and attending Houston Community College and San Jacinto College, Mr. Almendarez enlisted in Class B-199 of the Harris County Sheriff's Office Academy and graduated in 1999. Over the course of his exemplary 23-year tenure with the Sheriff's Office, he served as a patrolman in District 3 and as a field training officer, certified instructor, auto theft task force investigator, an investigator with the Multi-Agency Gang Task Force, where he worked with agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was certified as a master peace officer. And whereas when he was off duty, Deputy Almendarez took great pleasure in traveling, saltwater fishing, woodworking, barbecuing, and working in his yard. He was a true animal lover who delighted in the time he spent with his many pets, and he was a loyal fan of the Houston Texans and the Dallas Cowboys. And whereas although the untimely death of Darren Almendarez profoundly saddened his family and friends and those who were privileged to work alongside him, his record of dedicated service to his community will not soon be forgotten. Now therefore be it resolved that the Senate of the 88th Texas Legislature hereby pay tribute to the memory of Harris County Deputy Sheriff Darren Almendarez and extend heartfelt sympathy to his loved ones and to all others who mourn his passing. And be it further resolved that when the Texas Senate adjourns this day, it do so in his memory.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Deputy Darren Almendarez was a dedicated public servant. He was a husband, a father, a constituent of mine. As you heard, the deputy tragically lost his life last year. In fact, we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary, when he was with his wife, Flor, coming out of a grocery store, and they came upon 3 individuals, 3 thieves, attempting to steal his catalytic converter from his personal truck. He was shot and killed in the presence of his wife, Flor. Some of you were in the hearing. We have a bill coming up shortly after this to tackle the theft of catalytic converters. When Flor talked about that day, because Darren never went to the store with her, but that day he insisted on accompanying her. She talked about not even realizing that he was shot. Somehow he managed to walk himself over to her, put his arms around her, tell her he couldn't breathe. His last words that he loved her. And then he died. She has had to live with this. She's had to face the criminals in court. She talked about that night, making eye contact with the 3 individuals after they killed her husband and wondering why they didn't kill her. She has appeared in our criminal justice hearing very bravely to tell her story. We had a memorial this past Friday at the gravesite. Representative Wally was there, many members of law enforcement, and we heard more personal stories about the big catches that he'd make, or watching the Cowboys game, and all the hobbies that he loved to do. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have gotten to know Floyd over this last year. Mr. President, you were at the funeral, as many of us were. And this has propelled us to do more about this crime. But right now, we're focused on paying tribute to Deputy Almendarez and the wonderful public servant that he was. We're deeply sorry for the loss. And we know that today may not immediately take away the pain in your heart, Floyd. But I hope that seeing the support you have here today, we have many members from law enforcement, various PDs that are here, Sheriff's Office, to let you know that we support you. We got your back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitmire, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, members, and thank you, Senator Alvarado, for bringing this memorial resolution. It gives us an opportunity once more, Ms. Almendarez, to let you and your family know that Officer Almendarez will never be forgotten. And as the Senator just mentioned, we will always have your back. I did not know the officer personally, but I've learned so much from Representative Wally, Senator Alvarado, who are your elected representatives. Seems like your family is so connected to the community, and that's the reason why his memory will live on forever. But I rise today to acknowledge not only that great public servant, Deputy Almendarez, but I want everyone to know your courage as well and how you're fulfilling his request to take care of yourself and so you can tell the story and put a face on the tragedy that we're addressing with legislation later this afternoon. I have had the honor of chairing criminal justice for many years, and I always let the family of victims have all the time that they need to express their sorrow, to represent their loved one. Scores, unfortunately, of tragedies we've heard, but Ms. Almendarez, no one compares with the description and the vivid details that you gave in committee last week. I think your opening remarks were that you had not disclosed that to anyone. The damage that the officer, injury, and that he was having trouble breathing and still communicating with you. So I know some peace officers and law enforcement officers that were in the room last week, and they said it just set them back too. And as painful as that was for you, as I said in the committee, you're doing your duty and your husband's duty by giving us that vivid description so it can impact not only this body, but anyone that heard your voice and is now hearing our voice to repeat your tragedy. And I mentioned to you in closing last week, your being there made a difference. The legislation is moving through this body and will get to the House, and I think it's safe to say it will become law. We're not only enhancing the penalty for the theft of catalytic converters. If someone has catalytic converters in their possession, the presumption is, Ms. Almendarez, they're a thief, and we will hold them accountable. So I want you to know, as we honor this fallen hero, your husband, your loved one, and the piece of legislation is actually being named in his honor, that I wish there was words I could express that would do better than I'm expressing them. But I want you to know your courage, your husband's courage, is just unparalleled in the halls of this body, and you are making a huge difference, not only for your family and you and your husband, but for all Texans. This is going to be the toughest catalytic converter bill in the United States, largely because of your courage of coming and being the most meaningful witness that I can recall since I've been chairing criminal justice. So thank you. Thank you, Representative Wally and the other friends that are here. Senator Alvarado, great work. I will talk later when we bring up the legislation, Mr. President, about how several of us wanted that piece of legislation. Ms. Almendarez, that's how angry we are that there were several members wanted to introduce legislation, including myself, but we reached an agreement to let Senator Alvarado, because you are her constituent, and we wanted to bring all of our views behind one piece of legislation. So thank you, and thank you, members, for allowing me to express my remorse and my sadness over this occasion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Betancourt.
Lord, you've lost your husband. Officer Salinas, you've lost your best friend. But you've gained a whole bunch of people that have tremendous respect for what you went through, and to try to make this stop this from ever happening again. The story you told in criminal justice was so compelling and overwhelming that Senator Huffman and I, who we were elected in the same year, she was a criminal judge and I was a tax assessor, and we have probably heard every story that you can have. And the moment you said that Darren said, "I can't breathe and I love you," we both reached for whatever paper towel we could find because the tissue wasn't enough. And we can only hope, in God's grace, that we could say, "I love you," before we pass. So you always will have that gift of him saying, "I love you." And you need to know that you have now 31 friends here. And I suspect that Armando will be able to round up about 150 over in the House to make sure that his name is always there when we put an end to these crimes. Because these three, I'm not sure what to call them, had no belief in the sanctity of human life. Maybe they never have. But this body does, the House does, the state of Texas does, and they will always have his name on this. So when this has prevented another family tragedy from occurring, they'll look to Deputy Darren and they'll see that name again. And I know Don knows it and everyone else knows it that's standing with you. And with that, Mr. President, I would like to add all 31 members' names to the resolution.
This motion on the adding the names is adopted. Senator Alvarado.
Members, thank you for all signing on, and we're going to get to the bill shortly, but I want to recognize some individuals that are on the floor with her. One of their three children, Kayla, also some of the Deputy Darren Almendarez's colleagues, Lieutenant Don Saville and Javier Salinas, and of course, Representative Armando Wally, who was a longtime personal friend of Darren. So with that, I move adoption.
Thank you. Members, would you all rise in adoption of this important resolution and know that all of Texas has their arms around you. So sorry for your loss. The resolution is adopted. Members, that concludes the morning call. Senators Johnson and King and Sparks and May, we're getting ready to recognize Senator Alvarado. I just want to clear the line of sight. Thank you. Senator Alvarado, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 224.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider the committee substitute for Senate Bill 224.
Please explain the bill.
Thank you. Members, if y'all just heard about the tragic death of Deputy Darren.
Could we have some order, please, on the floor for the bill, the catalytic converter bill? Thank you. Yes,
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, if you just heard, we met with the family of Deputy Darren Almendares, who was tragically killed coming upon 3 individuals stealing his catalytic converter from his personal vehicle. We have named this bill the Deputy Darren Almendares Act. Senate Bill 224 puts in place a comprehensive criminal and regulatory framework to help this vicious trend. Members, this has become a very violent crime, a very sophisticated crime. It has led to deaths. It has led to people who have had to wait a long time to get their catalytic converters replaced. We know of car dealerships who have had a lot of theft just on the car lot. It has become a very violent crime ring. And in Texas, we are at the top and leading the nation on the theft of catalytic converters. Before I get into the substance of the bill, I want to thank Chairman Dean Whitmire for bringing this bill to his committee in a very timely manner, signing on as a joint author, and being a partner with me in this and an advocate in working to get this bill done in a bipartisan way. And I also want to acknowledge Senators Bettencourt and Middleton, who they also had very similar bills and worked with us. We incorporated some language in their bills. Members, this is what the process looks like. We come together as Democrats, Republicans, rural, urban, to solve problems facing Texans. And that's what this bill does. It's creating a presumption of unauthorized criminal possession, adding catalytic converter theft as a specific kind of theft in the theft statute to allow the value of these thefts to be aggregated. It's creating a penalty enhancement if the thief was in possession of a firearm, and it's also adding catalytic converter thefts to the criminal mischief statute and creating a new offense for possession of a catalytic converter removed from a vehicle. Senator Bettencourt, that was something that was in your bill. Finally, the bill incorporates regulatory provisions to close the business-to-business loophole by clarifying who can buy and who can sell catalytic converters and requiring some pretty meticulous record keeping of transactions between businesses. Members, this bill is a accumulation of working over the interim with stakeholders, with law enforcement, with prosecutors, and industry folks. It is giving law enforcement the tools that they need to investigate and to prosecute these dangerous crimes that will help make our communities safer. Mr. President, I do have a floor amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bettencourt, what purpose?
Ask questions of the author.
Do you yield?
I do.
Senator Alvarado, thanks, of course, and it's been a pleasure working with you and Senator Middleton on these bills and Dean Whitmire's committee. And I think the important point is that if we go back to the hearing that we had in Houston, that Senator Whitmire arranged, by that point in time, I think Deputy Darren had already been shot to death, and the issue had really exploded into the consciousness of at least the folks in Houston. True?
That's true, and I'm glad that you mentioned that hearing. There were 2 field hearings, or at least 2 hearings, one in Houston, and I know you're on the committee, you were present. I thank you for your input and recognizing the significance of this.
And and Mr. President, I think one of the real important points from that committee hearing was just the scope and the breadth of this, because while you picked up some of the criminal statutes from my bill, the important point I think that the public needs to understand, it's my estimation that this is well over $100 million of theft annually, well over $100 million. This is highly organized criminal gang activity, and somebody places an order, effectively people go out and look. Toyota Tundras seem to be well up on the list, which is, what happened. And in this case, you've got three perpetrators literally killing an off-duty deputy, Darren, for his catalytic converter. But there's enormous money in this, just 3-digit $1 million fraud money here, because of the values of palladium, ruthenium, and platinum. And so that's why this bill is really needed, because it's already, people are willing to kill over it. And importantly, the amount of loss it takes for people to try to replace those catalytic converters, the cost of it. But this is an enormous crime ring in the United States. And I believe, unfortunately, until this bill passes, Texas has been the primary hunting ground, but it will be no longer when this bill passes in Darren Deputy's name. So thank you for bringing it.
And thank you for your not only your testimony, but for your leadership in this effort.
Senator Middleton, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield?
Do you yield?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Alvarado, for bringing this bill. Extremely important to me, extremely important to the state and the community. Also, you've heard from law enforcement now as well. This would make it a lot easier for them to essentially do their job and hold thieves of catalytic converters more accountable in a much more simple way, because we're looking at possession, right? There's no good reason that you should be in possession of a catalytic converter, and the presumption should be that it's stolen, because this is not a victimless crime. This is not a nonviolent crime. We heard today what the consequences of this, and the nexus here of organized crime surrounds this. It feeds into money laundering. It feeds into all kind of things that are compromising public safety in our community. So I want to thank you for incorporating Senator Betancourt's bill and Senator Whitmire's and my own into this, because it's touched all of us personally. This issue has. Every single one of us here. We all probably know someone that's had their catalytic converter stolen. And unfortunately, it's a lot worse than that. People have lost their lives over this. So thank you for bringing this. This is important to being tough on crime and making sure that we're holding criminals accountable. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And you're new to the Senate, but I was pleased to see your engagement on this issue. You recognize as soon as you got here how serious this was, and we are giving law enforcement and prosecutors the flexibility and the discretion to investigate and really stick it to somebody who's even thinking of engaging in this crime.
Thank you.
Senator Whitmire, you're recognized.
Mr. President, I was going to speak in favor of committee substitute for 224. It's probably not the right time.
We're on suspension. You can do questions. If you want to speak on the bill, we'll hold you to final passage if you wish. Do you have a question, or do you want to speak on the bill?
I'll ask a question, Senator.
Yes. Do you yield?
I do.
Senator Alvarado, you actually had legislation last session that made improvements largely along the lines of documentation of those purchasing the catalytic converters, did you not?
That's correct. And at the time, the crime level wasn't as high as it was once we got started in the interim. And you took a field hearing to Houston. You've been engaged on this issue since last year. So also recognizing once the tragic death of Deputy Almendarez, we knew that we had to do something immediately. It certainly elevated the presence of the crime.
We also learned in that hearing that it is a national problem as well, did we not?
That's correct. And also what we learned is that Texas is amongst one of the top states for theft of catalytic converter crime. And we are passing, probably it's going to be the toughest law in this area.
And you also realize we're going to monitor it very carefully and see if even additional matters should be included in future legislation.
That's correct.
Because we're not holding this out, Mr. President, as a cure-all. There's still organized crime as we talk, trying to design methods to get around this proposed legislation. Because the concern is they'll take the catalytic converters and take them to Louisiana or other surrounding states. Are we not concerned about that?
Absolutely. And my preference would be for Congress to pass a nationwide bill, but we're doing what we need to do in Texas.
We're doing everything we can to make it the toughest statute in the nation, with the presumption information that if you have them, we don't need any excuses about your transporting them or you're actually reselling them. You are a thief if you've got possession of these multiple catalytic converters.
That's correct. And one of the challenges that law enforcement had, if they stopped somebody and they had more than one catalytic converter, they couldn't do anything. But this bill will allow them to be able to ask. This person will have to be able to prove ownership, come up with some sort of documentation for each of those catalytic converters, and that's the significance.
Senator Alvarado, I won't belabor the point. I'll be surprised if we don't have 31-0 vote on this important piece of legislation. In closing, I would like to thank the Lieutenant Governor for allowing us to have an interim study and focus on it in a Houston setting where we really heard from the stakeholders, and thank you and Senator Middleton and Bentoncourt and all others that had proposals to come together with your legislation, which also honors Officer Almendarez. So thank you. It's been a really productive piece of legislative process, and thank all the people involved. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitmire. The motion is on suspension. Any objection? Hearing none, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading committee substitute for Senate Bill 224. Please read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 224 relating to catalytic converters, including criminal conduct involving catalytic converters, providing administrative penalty, creating a criminal offense, increasing a criminal penalty.
Senator Alvarado, could you come forward for just a moment? Question for you. Members, we're just working on an amendment to the amendment, so be patient with us here. Members, following motion in writing while we're waiting for this amendment to the amendment.
Mr. President, I move suspension of Senate Rule 5.14, the intent calendar rule, in order to move the intent calendar deadline to 4 p.m. today. Motion by Hall.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. Members, sorry for the delay. We're just trying to make the bill a little even stronger. So just give us a moment. You have a great bill, Senator Alvarado. Members, we're getting back to work. Senator Alvarado, you're recognized. But we have to lay out the First Amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment number 1 by Alvarado.
Senator Alvarado, you're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This floor amendment makes some minor changes at the request of DPS. It removes vehicle storage facilities from business-to-business transactions list. It clarifies the definition of the metal recycling entity to ensure that those without fixed locations must still register as MPEs if engaging in metal recycling. And then it also clarifies the Motor Vehicle Crime Prevention Authority that will lead the interagency task force. I move adoption.
Members, there's a following amendment to the amendment that we've been working on. Secretary, read the caption.
Floor Amendment number 2 by Alvarado, amending Floor Amendment number 1.
Senator Alvarado, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I really mean that because after consultation with you, this came out of our conversation. Members, we feel so strongly about this bill and this crime that we are going to change the effective date. So you'll see on the amendment, it is changing the criminal part of it to be effective immediately, and then the regulatory would be July 1st of 2023 instead of January 1st, 2024. So right after final passage and the governor's signature, it would take effect immediately.
Any objection to the amendment to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Thank you, Senator. You're now recognized on passage to engrossment.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Again, I want to thank Chairman Whitmire, Senators Bettencourt and Middleton for their involvement, their leadership, and their support in this. And to all of our law enforcement who were here earlier and who might still be here in the audience, thank you for being partners in this. And I know that Floyd and her family and some of our Harris County deputies are still in the gallery. We thank you, and I move passage.
Any objection? Hearing none, bill passed to engrossment. You're recognized to spend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved, Mr. President.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt.
31 ayes, no nays. Rules suspended. Chair lays out in third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 224. You're recognized on Secretary. Read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 224 relating to catalytic converters.
You're recognized on final.
I move final passage.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Bertha Blanco.
31 ayes and no nays. The bill is passed. And since we have made this effective immediately when the House passes it, I know Representative Wally is working very hard. I hope the House will put this on the express lane and get this passed into the governor within the next week so we can make this law effective immediately. Thank you.
And thank you,
Congratulations.
Mr. President, for your support and your team as well.
Yes. Final vote, 31-0. Thank you, members. Thank you, Senator. Senator Huffman, you are recognized on Senate Bill 375. Suspend the regular order of business.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. At this time, I move to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider Senate Bill 375. Members, as all of you know, during the third call special session of the 87th legislature in 2021, the legislature adopted a new Senate district map known as Plan S2168. The Senate plan adopted by the legislature in 2021 were the districts utilized during the 2022 election cycle and remain in effect today. However, earlier this session, the Senate unanimously decided to take up the Senate plan again by adopting Senate Resolution 2 to ensure that the legislature has fulfilled its duty to apportion the state into senatorial district at its first regular session after the publication of the 24th decennial census of the United States as provided by Section 28, Article 3 of the Texas Constitution. Before the chamber today is Senate Bill 375, in which I propose that the Senate ratify and adopt the same Senate plan that was adopted by the legislature in 2021. The Senate Redistricting Committee of the 87th legislature put in countless hours throughout 2021 listening to public input, working with members, and developing the thoughtful plan that was ultimately adopted by the legislature. Furthermore, the Redistricting Committee held 6 virtual regional hearings and 2 other public hearings earlier this year to receive public input regarding whether any new information has developed since 2021. My goals and priorities when this plan was developed in 2021 included, but were not limited to, the following, each of which had to be balanced in every redistricting decision that was made during the 87th legislature. First and foremost, following all applicable law. 2, addressing partisan considerations. 3, equalizing population across districts. 4, preserving political subdivisions and communities of interest when possible. 5, preserving the cores of previous districts to the extent possible. 6, avoiding pairing incumbent members when possible. 7, achieving geographic compactness. And lastly, accommodating incumbent priorities to the extent that I could. I want to remind members that changing as little as one precinct has an impact upon at least one other district and typically has ripple effects that impact multiple districts or even the entire state. Senate Bill 375 was overwhelmingly approved on a bipartisan vote by the Senate Redistricting Committee. Moreover, no members of the Senate submitted any proposed amendments to Senate Bill 375, and no members of the Senate submitted any demonstration plans through the Texas Legislative Council during the 88th regular session. As was the case in 2021, I also assessed the demonstration plans that were submitted by the public. Even though no member offered any of these maps as an amendment to SB 375, I have considered each demonstration plan as follows. First and foremost, any redistricting plan must abide by all applicable law. I sought legal advice on each proposed public demonstration plan that was submitted. Second, I have always kept in mind the redistricting objective and priorities that I have previously laid out. In regard to the 3 demonstration plans submitted by members of the public this session, none of them adequately address the partisan considerations and the other priorities that I have laid out, and no member supported any of these plans by offering it as an amendment. To summarize, SB 375 represents the culmination of our thorough redistricting process during the 87th legislature, and it preserves the existing districts from the 2022 election cycle. Enacting SB 375 will discharge our constitutional obligations under Section 28, Article 3 of the Texas Constitution, and by ratifying the already existing maps, I believe that members will not need to draw lots again at the beginning of the 89th legislature. I urge each member to vote in favor of Senate Bill 375, and I move to suspend the regular order of business.
Secretary will call the roll on the suspension.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart.
There are 23 ayes and 7 no votes. The rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 375. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 375, relating the composition of districts for the election of a member of the Texas Senate.
Members, the following motion in writing. Secretary, read the motion.
Motion in writing. Mr. President, I move that the journal entry containing a transcript of the second reading debate on the committee substitute for Senate Bill 4, 87th Legislature, Senate Journal, third call session, fourth addendum, 2021, be included as an addendum to today's journal with an introductory statement that reads as follows. The Senate of the 88th Texas Legislature, regular session, is including as part of the record on SB 375 the following transcript from the second reading consideration of the CSSB 4 87th Texas Legislature third called session. The plan finally adopted in the CSSB 4 is identical to the Senate redistricting plan contained in SB 375. The remarks from the previous Senate are germane to the consideration of SB 375 and provide a more thorough explanation of the rationale for adopting the districts contained in the original redistricting plan. Motion by Alvarado.
Is there objection? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. You're recognized to pass to engrossment.
I move passage to engrossment on Senate Bill 375.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Burwell, Blanco.
23 ayes and 7 nays. The bill passed to engrossment. You would need 1 to suspend because we need 24 today.
All right,
You can let me know.
I will try. Thank you.
Senator Huffman, you found a friend. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Burwell, Blanco.
24 ayes and 6 nays. The rule is passed. Constitutional 3-day rule is suspended, rather. Secretary now lays out in third reading and final passage Senate Bill 375. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 375, relating the composition of districts for the election of members of the Texas Senate.
You're recognized on final.
Move final passage of SB 375.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Burwell, Blanco.
23 ayes, 7 nays. Bill is finally passed. Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Senator Hughes, you're recognized to suspend the rules.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend Senate Rule 610A, the reconsideration rule, to permit a motion to reconsider passage to engrossment of Senate Bill 14. Members, you may recall we passed Senate Bill 14 last week, and under 610A, reconsideration can be had at any time on the same legislative day or the next legislative day. We are just outside of that window under the rules, and the author of that bill wishes to reconsider the bill, and so for that reason I move we suspend the Senate's regular order of business.
Any objection? Hearing none. Rules are suspended. The chair recognizes Senator Campbell for a motion to reconsider the vote by which SB 14 passed to engrossment.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Members, what I'm asking is to remove the amendment that was added on to the floor, SB 14. The amendment was not discussed in committee, and a lot of questions have been raised. So with that, out of deference to the body, I'd like to remove the amendment.
Senator Menendez, what purpose?
Questions of the author?
Do you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sarah Campbell, you and I had discussed the amendment when you asked me a few questions in the Senate lounge the day before. Did we not talk about the amendment a little bit? And in committee, we heard doctors or a doctor discuss the process by which some of these puberty blockers and other hormones, how they work. And when you and I discussed the amendment, we talked about considering the safety and the well-being of children who are already in the process. I'm dismayed. I'm quite frankly surprised. I know I don't understand how you want to take children who are currently under the care of a doctor, and when the bill passes, they're no longer allowed to have that care. Is that what you're saying? That once this bill becomes effective, now if you're taking the amendment off, does this mean the effective date is December 1st again?
I have an amendment to leave, that's a technical change. I have an amendment to leave the date at September 1, become effective September 1.
But the date on your bill is December 1st.
Yes, but the amendment had two different points. One was a technical cleanup, if you will, to move the effective date from December 1 up to September 1. And I've got another amendment to leave that effective date September 1.
So at this time, what you want to do is strip off the amendment where you had considered the children and the families and the parents who had made the decisions long ago, who are currently in the process, and you've decided that not only do you want their care to be illegal as of December 1st in your original bill, now you want it to be illegal September 1st. Is that correct?
It was already going to be September the 1st.
But I don't understand how. If you have an amendment, then why do you need the amendment?
Well, I mean, whenever I put on the amendment on 14, I'd added the technical cleanup that changed it from December 1 to September 1. So when I take this off, there will not be that date change, and I will offer an amendment to restore the date to September 1.
What is the reason to track the amendment that you had first adopted and everybody agreed to without objection? Nobody objected to you at the amendment that you and I discussed. What is the policy decision to remove the amendment today?
The actual amendment that I put on 14, or are you talking about the date from December up to September?
The amendment that would allow the children who are currently under the care of a doctor to continue to finish their care.
The amendment was not discussed in committee, and there were so many questions that have been brought up since the amendment was put on that, out of respect for the body, I'm going to just take it down. Ask that it be taken down.
What is the reason to remove the amendment?
Ask that it be taken down. 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 A
But no one objected to your amendment when we adopted the amendment. So what do you mean by respect?
You didn't vote for the amendment.
No, there was no objection. The president said, is there objection? Without objection, amendment's adopted. So no one objected to the amendment. So I don't understand where we're lacking respect for the body.
I know there have been so many questions that have come up. There was no discussion regarding the amendment I was going to put on in committee. And truly, out of respect for everyone, I am going to ask for that it just be removed. I want to withdraw it. Remove it.
Okay. So thank you for answering my questions. Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Menendez, what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. At what point would it be appropriate to speak against the motion to reconsider the amendment, the removal of the amendment?
Right now, we're on reconsideration to passage to engrossment, and I have another senator who wants to speak.
Okay. So I'm just wondering
when she offers the amendment.
When she offers the amendment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. Senator Johnson, what purpose?
To speak, I guess, to ask the author and other members of the chamber a question regarding the motion to reconsider and to remove the amendment.
Do you yield, Senator Campbell?
Absolutely.
Senator Campbell, as I understand the exchange with you and Senator Menendez, your concern is that I guess the members of the body did not have sufficient opportunity to consider the amendment prior to the time that it was offered. And therefore, the vote by the body accepting the amendment might not have been consistent with the views they now hold. Is that correct?
I think absolutely that the body did not have opportunity to hear any discussion in committee or any discussion by me prior to offering the amendment. So it was a surprise amendment to the body, and out of respect for them, I'm just going to withdraw it.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. The issue itself was not a surprise, was it? The question of whether or not children should be able to continue the care they're currently undergoing is a topic that has been discussed in conjunction with your bill, is it not?
Your question again?
My question is whether people were surprised by the whole idea of having an amendment that would allow children who are undergoing care currently to continue their care.
Well, there was quite a bit of concern in the communities about that. And there was so much, I think, confusion about it that it wasn't clear enough. And because there is no science, it creates confusion as to what should be done. And the best thing, truly, I think, for the bill is to withdraw the amendment that I put on.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the idea, and we may see it again this session, where we might need to reconsider an amendment due to insufficient time to consider. Since that's the feeling, apparently, of the body, perhaps the senators who are concerned about that amendment would now choose to engage in a debate on the topic, particularly with advocates like Senator Menendez, who have invested a great deal of time in the prior debate. So if we're going to have a meaningful conversation and vote on this amendment, perhaps those of you who think we should take it off should now voice your concerns. And we can have a debate.
Well, and while that is an offer to the body, I can say that there were so many questions out there that many people were having to discuss or concerned or confused about. And it would have been nice for me to bring it up in the committee that this is why I want to withdraw the amendment.
I appreciate and respect your concerns, and I just wonder if anybody else would like to take this opportunity to voice their concerns with the amendment that would, if it were to stay, allow children who are currently undergoing a regime of medical treatment to continue that regime of medical treatment, if that's the correct thing in the estimation of the professionals who serve them.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator.
President.
Members, the vote is on the motion to reconsider. The Secretary will call the roll.
That's a vote.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
19 ayes and 11 nays. The motion is adopted to reconsider. So members, this puts us back on second reading, okay, before engrossment. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 14, relating to prohibition on the provision to certain children of procedures and treatments for gender transitioning, gender reassignment, or gender dysphoria.
Chair recognizes Senator Hughes for a motion to suspend rules.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend Senate Rule 610A. Again, the reconsideration rule, this time to permit a motion to reconsider the adoption of floor amendment number 1.
Secretary will call the roll on the motion.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
19 ayes, 11 nays. The motion is adopted. Chair now recognizes Senator Campbell for a motion to reconsider the vote by which the floor amendment was adopted.
Mr. President, I move to reconsider the vote by which the floor amendment number 1 was adopted.
Senator Menendez, did you want to speak on the motion to rescind it or on the motion to reconsider the amendment? Is this when you wanted to speak?
Yes, please.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I've got many messages coming into my phone from doctors, and there are over 80 scientific citations supporting how healthcare is supposed to be done. And there's extensive data showing that hormone therapy withdrawal symptoms can be and are very real, difficult to cope with, including high blood pressure, malaise. I'm not sure, after the hearing where Senator Campbell and I sat through, why we would want to pull the rug out from under people. We had an amendment where all the Democrats signed and voted to make it against the law for any surgical treatments on children. What we're asking is that children who are currently under the care with this hormone replacement therapy, that they be allowed to finish and they not have the rug pulled out from underneath them. I'm concerned that under the guise of protecting children, that we're actually going to hurt many children and their families. Possibly, some who can will leave the state, and maybe that's the overarching goal. Jared Campbell, I know, and we've talked about this. You're a doctor. You know, we discussed last week that when doctors put you on steroids, they taper you up and they taper you down because those hormones affect your body. I'm not sure, and I hope that if this bill gets out of this building, out of this chamber, without this, that hopefully science and medicine can prevail and protect those children who are currently under the care so that their safety and well-being will not be affected by this. Many times in this building we discuss not going backwards and retroactively affecting people. And this is one of those cases where it's not a red light camera. It's not a legal issue. It's not a business issue. It's not a contract. It's someone's life. And so it is for that reason that I ask members to think about it and to really think about the fact that grandfathering those children whose parents and their medical professionals have already been on this established journey with a created plan for their families, that they be allowed to see the end of their plan. Even if we say no surgical, that's fine. Not a problem. But the fact that you want to just drop the hammer on them in terms of their hormone therapy, I think it's medically unwise, and I think it's just not a thoughtful or a kind thing to do, and I'm very concerned. And so it's for that reason that I stand up to speak against the motion to reconsider. I've appreciated the conversations that you and I have had about these children, and that you wanted not to have anybody be hurt, because I do believe you when you say you don't want anyone hurt. You don't want anyone hurt in the process but these are kids who are already in the process, and I thought we had at least found common ground on that. So thank you for your time, and thank you.
Thank you.
Move against reconsideration.
Thank you, Senator. Vote is on reconsideration. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
19 ayes and 11 nays. The motion is adopted. Members, we're now back on floor amendment number 1. Chair recognizes Senator Campbell.
Mr. President, I move to withdraw floor amendment number 1.
Any objection? Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton.
19 ayes, 11 nays. The amendment is withdrawn. Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment. This is floor amendment number 4.
Yes.
Floor amendment number 4 by Campbell.
You're recognized on your amendment, Senator Campbell.
Members, this amendment moves the effective date from December 1 to September 1, as is our customary effective date.
Senator Menendez, what purpose?
A couple quick questions of the author.
Do you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Campbell, for yielding. Senator Campbell, your bill originally had the December 1st date, and now you're changing it to September 1st. Is there a policy decision for that?
It's the usual and customary date, September 1. I did not have a reason for December 1.
Isn't it true that sometimes we'll put in an effective date later to give time for people to understand the new law, for the word to get out, for a variety of reasons? I've seen later effective dates, and so I thought that your original bill with a December 1st date, giving the folks a few more months to understand the changes in the law, that was a helpful thing. I just don't see the policy decision for that, and you just, the only reason is because you wanted to line up with the other bills?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Members, the vote is on amendment number 4. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
19 ayes, 11 nays. The amendment is adopted. You are now recognized passage to engrossment.
Mr. President, I move passage to engrossment of Senate Bill 14.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell.
19 ayes, 11 nays. That amendment, the bill passes to engrossment, and will hold there until tomorrow. Thank you. Senator Birdwell, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on Senate Bill 29.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is the third reading suspension on the bill, Senate Bill 29, related to prohibiting governmental entities' implementation of COVID-19 vaccines. I move to suspend the regular order of business, Mr. President.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
20 ayes, 10 nays, rules are suspended. The chair now lays out in third reading and final passage Senate Bill 29. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 29 relating to prohibited governmental entity implementation or enforcement of a vaccine mandate.
You're recognized on final passage.
Move final passage, Mr. President.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
20 ayes, 10 nays. The bill is finally passed. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members.
Senator Johnson, you're recognized. Suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414 gives effect to the sunset staff recommendations regarding the State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners, also known as the Veterinary Board. The Sunset Board over the past decade has repeatedly found that there's significant problems with data collection, reliability, and analysis, as well as poor enforcement procedures of the Veterinary Board. And so Senate Bill 1414 provides a process to improve the board's performance over the next 4 years, and it does so by establishing a temporary 4-year relationship between the TDLR, Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and the Veterinary Board, during which TDLR will provide the board with policymaking and administrative oversight, guidance, and support. Members, I move to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414.
Senator Hinojosa, what purpose?
Will the senator yield for questions?
Do you yield?
Yes, I do, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, for carrying the committee substitute Senate Bill 1414 dealing with the veterinarian board and the agency itself. As you know, we've had many challenges with this board and the way it's been doing its work in regulating our veterinarians. And a couple of sessions ago, we passed the prescription monitoring program that applies to pharmacists and any drug dispenser dealing with medication that is a controlled substance. So my question is, how are veterinarians involved with controlled substances?
Veterinarians deal in controlled substance on a daily basis, and so there is a concern with the proper oversight of veterinary practices regarding controlled substances.
Well, as you know, when we passed legislation dealing with the prescription monitoring program that applied to all doctors, it was to address the issue of just going shopping for drugs, having a client or having someone who was addicted to drugs go from pharmacy to pharmacy and get a controlled substance without the pharmacy having a way to check to see and make sure that that person was not just forum shopping, if you will, for different controlled substances. But the veterinarians covered under the prescription monitoring program?
No, Senator Hinojosa, they are not presently covered under the prescription monitoring program, and they deal in controlled substances that can be used for human consumption and abuse.
And are you aware whether or not we have data on the number of controlled substances that are diverted from veterinarians?
I'm aware that it is a problem, Senator Hinojosa.
Well, did you know that DEA research and data shows that the majority of controlled substances that are diverted for illegal use are those that are under the control of veterinarians?
I was not aware of that fact, Senator.
And why would that be? We don't have access to that data ourselves as a state?
I suspect that we do have access to that data, and one of the problems that we're addressing through that sunset bill is the inadequate, at best, management of data and data systems at the veterinary board. So that one of the goals of placing it temporarily under the authority of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation is that we expect that their expertise in enforcement, risk-based inspections, data-informed inspection schedules, and other standardized inspection procedures will assist in the oversight of the veterinary board and dealing in controlled substances.
Well, let me ask you, as you all know, pharmacists can keep a controlled substance only for a certain number of days and a certain inventory that's very much controlled and measured and counted. Are the veterinarians subject to the same rules on how long they can, how large the inventory can be, and how long can they keep those drugs in their inventory, controlled substance drugs?
And Senator, insofar as I know, they're not subject to the same rules, and I'm not an authority on the regulations put on veterinarians. This bill is more about the governance, but I do recognize the problem that you're raising here and hope that it can be at least in part addressed through better oversight and management of data and procedures.
Well, as you all know, right now the biggest controlled substance diversion that's taking place in the state with all the opioids challenges that we face are by veterinarians because they don't report and are not monitored by anybody in the state as to how they handle their controlled substances and whether or not they're being diverted and what amount is being diverted. What we do know for a fact is that controlled substances by veterinarians, there's no proper oversight. As a matter of fact, the investigators for the veterinarian board maybe go out there and check every 4, 5, 6 years. They can not even check them on an annual basis, regular basis, because there's no reporting requirement. And this really is a major problem that we face in our state. Other states have now veterinarians under regulation for them to be able to report anytime they prescribe a controlled substance. And right now, this very persistent drug diversion that's taking place with our veterinarians, will the change to the licensing board make any difference in terms of trying to provide some better oversight over the veterinarians on how they use controlled substances?
Senator, I think it's almost certain to make a significant difference because, as you've just cited, oversight has been lacking. Budget allocations requests have been insufficient. With increased resources, both within the veterinary board itself and within the agency, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, with their experience and with the direct charge that we're placing on them to make sure that the entire process is better administered, I think we will see an improvement in enforcement of these procedures. But in addition, Senator Hinojosa, I think if what you're looking towards is some future legislation regarding regulation of controlled substances and the veterinary practice, I think the information that we're going to get in the next couple of years as a result of the greater oversight and better and more efficient administration is we're going to have more data that would better inform the policies that I think you're highlighting the need of here today.
It's a huge problem, and I had it on the original bill that established the prescription monitoring program, and unfortunately it was taken out on the Senate floor by about 2 votes difference. And the reality is that nowadays it doesn't take much to do a query on the data that's necessary to keep a proper oversight of our controlled substances that are creating this opioid epidemic in our state. And it is really a situation that at some point we need to correct by bringing in the veterinarians under the prescription monitoring program so we can have a better feel and sense of controlling the controlled substances they manage, which from what we know from the DEA is not very well managed and is really causing a lot of problems because the majority of controlled substance drugs that are being diverted are from veterinarians. And we need to do a better job in providing proper oversight. But thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Senator. And I hope that we can continue to work on this over the interim with better management by TDLR and the veterinary board.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Perry, what purpose?
Question for the author?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. We sat side by side in Sunset. We heard the stories. We know about the vet boards and their history of recent. Sunset is put them in a good place, I think, to move forward. I want, for the record, and we have had this every time this conversation's come up in our hearing, this is meant to be a temporary oversight and never a permanent installation of TDLR over the veterinarians, correct?
That is absolutely the intent, and we discussed this in committee, and I appreciate you bringing it up on the Senate floor. It should be in the record as the legislative intent. We do not want a veterinary board that's perpetually subject to the oversight of TDLR, and we expect that over the course of these next 4 years, we will see the board back up on its own feet and running well.
And there is clear boundaries within the intent, as well as we believe the statute that we've written, that they are not to engage in the scope of practice issues. TDLR's oversight board will not engage in scope of practices for veterinarians.
It is explicit in the statute, and importantly, as we discussed in committee, TDLR doesn't have authority at all under the statute to create new rules regarding the scope of practice. It will have oversight regarding future actions by the board to make sure that everything's running on time, but it is not going to be the new veterinary board de facto.
Well, I appreciate the energy and the effort from the whole Sunset staff, as well as even the members on Sunset. We took it seriously. I think we've identified problems. I would encourage that individual veterinarian that's too busy to look up to get engaged in their board, because part of this happened because over time they did not engage in their board and what was going on. So thank you for the work.
Thank you, Senator Perry.
Members, the vote is on suspension. Any objection? Hearing none. Rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 1414 relating to temporary regulation of the practice of veterinary medicine by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation.
You're recognized on passage to engrossment.
Passage to third reading, Mr. President?
Was this a third reading bill? No. To engrossment.
It is. I'm sorry, my notes are incorrect.
You got ahead of me there. You can't pass the bill before
I moved
the
passage to
third.
engrossment.
You can't get to third base from first. You have to go to second to get there.
Baseball's been
Any
a long
objection?
time.
Hearing none. Bill passed to engrossment. You are now recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
That's like the third base coach saying it's okay to come to third. Okay. Secretary, call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell.
31 ayes, no nays. Rule is suspended. Chair lays out third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 1414 relating to the temporary regulation of the practice of veterinary medicine by the Department of Licensing and Regulation.
Now you can run all the way to home plate.
I move final passage to committee substitute for Senate Bill 1414.
Secretary, call the...
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
And the crowd on both sides cheered 31-0. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Senator Perry, can you come forward for a moment? Senator Flores, you're recognized. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1236. Suspend the regular order of business.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take up and consider the committee substitute for Senate Bill 1236. Open access to riverbeds and streams for hunting has proven to be a conduit for poaching, trespassing, and damage to private property that border these areas. Offenses like these are almost impossible to enforce due to their remote locations. To solve this issue, 10 counties have already enacted a ban on the discharge of firearms on the bed or bank of a river or a stream. Specifically, Senate Bill 1236 amends Section 284.001 of the Parks and Wildlife Code to include Childress, Cottle, Ford, Lampasas, and Motley counties. This bill does not prohibit the use of archery equipment for fishing or the discharge of a shotgun loaded with shot. With this legislation, we can further protect our private property owners with the threat of trespassing, property damage, and poaching. Mr. President, I move suspension of the Senate's regular order of business.
Senator Gutierrez, what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a few questions?
Do you yield?
I do.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Flores, for bringing this particular bill. You can just enlighten us. 1236 adds some counties that can disallow the use of firearms in and around the shoreline. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. Just like there's a number of counties in there that are in, where the majority of the ones that are currently exempt are in your Senate district. So it's a circumstance that's very similar.
That's right. And it actually prohibits the use of firearms beyond the shore of a river as well, doesn't it?
It prohibits the discharge of a firearm other than a shotgun that dispenses shot, that for duck hunting and things like that. Use of a shotgun is not prohibited, but for other firearms, it is. And archery equipment, unless it's archery equipment used for fishing.
And it's actually a ban on ammunition that is discharged under current law or arrows which shot could physically contact the bed or a bank of any navigable stream, correct?
It's not a bill that bans the possession of them. It bans the discharge of them. But you may possess a rifle, a shotgun, the ammunition while you're on a riverbed.
Right. But it certainly regulates them, right?
It provides for just like we have like the offense of discharging a firearm off a public roadway. Navigable rivers and streams kind of are the same way. They're like a roadway, but the water. Mm-hmm. So basically, the same circumstances as to why it was the wisdom of this legislature to prohibit hunting from a roadway. It's the same premise when we're talking about navigable streams.
Now, I have a few guns myself, but I would consider you probably the premier expert on weapons of anybody in this building, or at least on this side of the building.
Well, there's some others in here, Senator, that are pretty good hands. I'm just but thank you for the compliment.
Well, I mean, just at your time as a game warden, I think that you've had so many years in public service.
Thank you.
Would it be fair to say that a 9mm bullet can travel about 1.3 miles? Is that fair to say?
It would be safe to say that.
And would it be safe to say that a .556 round, it's a little bit bigger, could travel about 2.5 miles? Is that a fair statement?
While I'm not an expert on munitions, I would say that in my experience, unobstructed is probably safe to say that, sir.
And how about a .308?
308 is unobstructed. Again, I'm not a firearms expert, but in my experience, unobstructed, yeah, I would say it would be fair to say that.
Okay. And while your suggestion is that we're not prohibiting the carrying or the possession of these goods, we are prohibiting the use around these rivers. That's accurate, correct?
That's correct. The actual possession of the firearm or the ammunition is not prohibited under this bill. It's the discharge of anything other than a shotgun with shot or archery equipment that's not equipped with the reel and the other types of equipment for use for fishing with a bow.
And don't get me wrong, I think this is a good piece of legislation.
Sure,
I'm voting with you, and I just want to get a couple more questions here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Covered. So we also prohibit the use of AR-15s around navigable rivers, correct?
It's if they discharge any firearm other than a shotgun that was shot that's used for waterfowl hunting and that type of activity, any other discharge of a weapon other than a shotgun was shot would be prohibited on a riverbed.
And I don't want to be duplicative of what you just said, but including handguns, you couldn't discharge a handgun.
Unless, a handgun has that's discharging. That's not a shotgun that fires shot.
And there are some exceptions for law enforcement.
Yes, there are.
Okay. All right. So just to sum it up, this bill bans most firearms from being used in an area that could be hundreds of yards or even miles away from a riverbed. I think we can all agree with that. Why doesn't this violate the Second Amendment, this regulation here that we're doing? Why doesn't it violate the Second Amendment?
Because it doesn't ban the use of a weapon. It doesn't make the possession of a weapon. It doesn't violate the spirit of the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And plus this is also used for hunting, which is a privilege. So I don't see, sir, how this would infringe on the Second Amendment. I would not do anything to infringe on our right to bear arms.
But it does regulate guns, and it does ban guns in a certain area, correct? The use of guns.
Well, it's just like if you look at waterfowl hunting, there's certain types of shotguns that cannot be used, punt guns, things of that nature, market guns. So it's part of being able to use what would be considered appropriate for the activity. If it's not, you cannot use, for example, a machine gun to hunt ducks. It's just you can't do it. It's not allowed by state and federal law. This issue right here has to do with dealing with our protecting our property rights as well.
And that leads me to, I've got two questions left, and then I'll sit down.
Thank you.
The purpose of this statute, and I think you just touched on it a little bit. What is the purpose of this statute?
The purpose of this statute is to pretty much to prevent the usage of these riverbeds as a corridor for poaching, for damaging property, and the like along our riverbeds.
So protecting wildlife is what you're saying.
And wildlife comes along with that as well, yes. And their landowners' rights. The landowners on both sides of the river or navigable stream are protected as well.
This is my final question. Why do you think there are more legal protections for wildlife on our riverbeds than there are for children in schools?
Well, sir, I can only speak to this bill and speak that protection of the wildlife is something that's in the Parks and Wildlife Code, which this bill is germane to, and certainly I don't think there's anybody in this chamber that would support anything that would harm children.
Well, I hope we can work together on legislation that will help protect children.
Senator. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Perry, what purpose?
Question of the author.
Do you yield, Senator?
I do.
So the bill's more about private property rights in that sense that if I'm a private landowner, I happen to be next to a drive, a riverbed, or a riverbed for that matter, I don't want people shooting into my property at deer that I may have raised for my grandkids, or just shooting into the property without my knowledge.
Well, it's both, actually. And
safety.
It takes care of all those issues, Senator.
It's not about the discharge or the weapon itself. It's about private property protection and to keep. And a lot of states have public hunts, and Texas has some. But Colorado's open season. When you show up there, elk, you've got all these orange vests sitting around a circle, and they're all looking at each other when the sun comes up, and they're shooting weapons that can go across 3 miles. So it's a safety factor too. If you limit the people the ability to shoot into your area, you don't have to worry about people being in that area to shoot into your area. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I kind of see this bill also, Senator, again, like I compared earlier, like we don't allow the discharge of a firearm from a public road, and these navigable streams pretty much are along the same model.
Thank you, Senator Perry. Members, the vote is on suspension. Any objection? Hearing none. Rules are suspended. Chair lays out in second reading Senate Bill, Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 1236. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 1236, relating the use of certain weapons in or on the bed or bank of a navigable river or stream.
Thank you.
There is an amendment. Secretary, read the amendment.
for amendment number 1 by Perry.
Senator Perry, you're recognized.
Members, the amendment basically converts Senator Flores' bill that was list of counties, several counties, and converts it to a statewide application. So it repeals the current list of counties and the ones he's adding to it, and it puts that statewide ban hunting in rivers and streams, all counties. I believe it is acceptable to the author.
Yes, it is acceptable.
Senator Flores?
It is acceptable.
Amendment is acceptable to the author. Any objections from anyone else? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. You're recognized on passage to engrossment, Senator.
President, I move passage to engrossment.
Any objection? Hearing none, bill passed to engrossment. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Mr. President, I move to suspend the constitutional rule that bills be read on 3 several days.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado Betancourt.
31 ayes, no nays. Rule suspended. Chair lays out in third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1236. Senate Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 1236 relating the use of certain weapons in or on the bed or bank of a navigable river or stream.
You're recognized on final.
Mr. President, I move final passage of Senate Bill 1236 as amended.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado Betancourt Bergdahl Blanco.
30 ayes and no nays. The bill is finally passed. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President, members.
Senator Hancock, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on Senate Bill 1598.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business, consider Senate Bill 1598 at this time relating to the composition of the Homeland Security Council. Senate Bill 1598 removes the specific names of the House and Senate committees from the Homeland Security Advisory Council makeup and instead includes the House and the Senate committees with jurisdiction over Veteran Affairs and Homeland Security. The bill simply gives continuity to the committees included in the Homeland Security Advisory Council. And with that, I move suspension.
Any objection? Hearing none, rules are suspended. Chair lays out in second reading. Senate Bill 1598. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 1598 relating the composition of the Homeland Security Council.
You're recognized to pass to engrossment.
Move pass to engrossment.
Any objection? Hearing none, bill passed to engrossment. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado Betancourt Bergdahl.
30 ayes and 1 nay. The rule is suspended. Chair lays out, and I know you're thinking, who voted against me?
I know.
You know. The Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 1598 relating the composition of the Homeland Security Council.
You're recognized on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage of Senate Bill 1598.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado Betancourt Bergdahl.
30 ayes, 1 nay.
A little friendly fire. Just friendly fire.
Senator Zaffarini, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 885. Secretary will read the caption. I'm sorry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members, I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take up and consider at this time the committee substitute for Senate Bill 885 relating to the grounds for terminating the parent-child relationships. Members, this bill would establish that a court may terminate a parent-child relationship if the parent receives a protective order for a period that exceeds 2 years due to a family violence felony offense. It would require the courts to use a clear and convincing evidence standard, provide that the court must grant a parent's petition for reinstatement if the parent is found not guilty of the underlying felony offense, and establish that a child may not be adopted before a parent has been convicted of the offense because parental rights cannot be restored once the child is adopted. Mr. President, I move suspension.
Any objection? Hearing none, rules suspended. Chair lays out in second reading. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 885. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 885 relating to the grounds for terminating and reinstating a person's parental rights and the adoption of certain children.
You're recognized. Passage to engrossment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage to engrossment.
Any objection? Hearing none, bill passed to engrossment. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. So moved.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
29 ayes, 2 nays. The rule is suspended. Chair lays out in third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 885. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 885 relating to the grounds for terminating and reinstating a person's parental rights and the adoption of certain children.
You're recognized on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
29 ayes and 2 nays. The bill is finally passed, and I know that means you've passed more than one.
Almost 10. Actually 15.
15 already.
Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Members, who's ever in second place is way behind, is all I can tell you. Senator Perry, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on Senate Bill 28.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Committee substitute Senate Bill 28, the Texas Water Fund and New Supply Fund. In order for Texans to survive, thrive, and succeed and have a Texas miracle continue, we need water. State water supply and infrastructure are necessary to provide food, fiber, and fuel for Texas to succeed. Senate Bill 28 creates a pathway for funding water projects that our grandkids will be around for future, and future members of this body will be reminded about how important water is to our state. This legislation is an accumulation of years of work by my committee members, water stakeholders, and state agencies, and many more. Senate Bill 28 creates the Texas Water Fund and the New Water Supply Fund as venues to fund infrastructure and big water supply projects. Texas Water Development Board will be charged with tackling our state's failing infrastructure through the Texas Water Fund, utilizing existing programs to minimize the need for extended bureaucracy. The goal of the Texas Water Fund is to fix our leaking and breaking infrastructure. Remember, our infrastructure is not perfect without the supply to go in it. The New Water Supply Fund will boldly fund large projects of new water supply, that is, supply that is not currently accounted for in the state. I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for making Senate Bill 28 a priority bill, members of the Senate Committee on Water, Agriculture, Rural Affairs for working on the interim for me to get this true legacy that we can all be proud of. Members, there's been several water pieces over the last 30 years or more. Senate Bill 1 that did the water supply plan back in the 90s. We did SWIFT in 13. We did Senate Bill 8, Senate Bill 7, Senate Bill 6 regarding the flood mitigation and the funding that's set up with that. This will fall into one of those pieces when we look back on how we've developed and create future water supply. With that, I move to suspend the regular order of business.
Senator Hinojosa, what purpose?
Will Senator Perry yield for a couple of questions?
Do you yield?
Yes, sir.
And thank you, Senator Perry. And as you well know, for years and session after session, we've been working to try to address the many challenges we face with water shortages as our state continues to grow. They have to face different issues with the droughts and the damage it causes. But your bill, and I'm co-author of your bill, because I really support it. I think it's a very good bill. I would imagine as we implement the Senate Bill 28, somewhere along the way we may make some adjustments in trying to also have water storage facilities. As you well know, some regions of the state are working to try to capture stormwater or rainwater in storage and store it underground, where they would be able to use it and reuse it Would that be possible under the bill? I don't think it covers it right now, as I understand the structure. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's focused on development of interior resources such as marine desal, that's seawater, brackish desal. We already got about 38 plants in the state working. We need to develop that network of brackish desal. Produced water, it's a study we did last session that we've got a pilot project online for this next year to come up with the technologies where we can convert somewhere upwards of 14 million barrels of water coming out of the produced water in the oil and gas industry, and that could be 250,000 acre feet. We've had other states contiguous to Texas that have offered to sell water in the past that we weren't prepared to take that on. So this is the plan to set up those large water supply as well as deal with existing infrastructure. We lose about 150 million gallons of water, 1 billion gallons of water a year through those leaky pipes, boil water notices. So that's the emphasis, but as we move forward and as this bill develops and over time we look out there, and if there is opportunity to capture water that's not being utilized in the existing input, I can see where that conversation be had by the advisory group as well as the Water Development Board as we go through.
Would you be aware or know whether or not the Texas Water Development Board has that authority right now? Sessions ago, I can't remember how many sessions ago, we passed bonding authority for $6 billion, evergreen water authority. That gave the Water Development Board quite a bit of discretion to be able to deal with water projects and water conservation. Would those water storage facilities that I just described, stored water, storm water, rainwater, flood water, would they be eligible right now under the Water Development Board, different programs?
There's 6 buckets over at the Water Development Board, 6 programs of money. I would assume that one of those projects or one of those programs could accommodate that. I'd be glad to look into it for you and make sure that $6 billion's turned, I don't know how many times. And to the Water Development Board's credit, they've never had a default. They do a good job with the monies we've obligated them for. But I would tell you that staff, we ought to get together and see if your water storage conversation fits in any of the existing programs, and maybe we could work through that.
And I'll check with them because I'm very supportive of the work that the Water Development Board has done. They've been very responsive, and without a doubt, I would give an A+ in their work.
I would too. They do a great job. Thanks.
Thank you, Governor Perry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The move is on suspension. Any objection?
Suspend regular order of rules.
Hearing none, rules are suspended. Chair lays out in second reading the committee substitute for Senate Bill 28. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 28 relating to financial assistance provided and programs administered by the Texas Water Development Board.
There is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 1 by Perry.
You recognize Senator Perry.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an amendment that came through the process that wanted to make certain that the advisory committee would not recommend specific projects for consideration for receipt of their financial assistance from the fund. We're trying to keep 100% transparency, remove any conflicts of interest that may exist. It's under the SWIFT Act that everybody is pretty much familiar with and has seen in operations, but we want to protect the funding and make sure it's not commandeered by special interest or agendas of the day.
Any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. The following amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 2 by Perry.
Senator Perry, on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment came from the comptroller. They needed some clarity on how the money was going to be deposited and the return of the receipts back to the particular funds. They felt like this was language that needed there to make sure that everyone understood how the money flowed.
Making sure everyone has a chance to read it. Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. You are now recognized on passage to engrossment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move passage to engrossment.
Secretary will call the roll. I'm sorry, no objection? Bill passed to engrossment. Now you're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Move to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Now the secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt,
31 ayes and no nays, rule suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 28. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 28 relating to financial assistance provided and programs administered by the Texas Water Development Board.
You're recognized on final passage.
Move final passage.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Birdwell,
31 ayes and no nays. The bill is finally passed. And Senator, thank you for being a lead on water since 2000, long before 2015. But when I appointed you chair of Rural Affairs and Water, you jumped in the deep end of the pool and been swimming ever since. So thank you.
And thank you.
Important issue.
Thank you for that appointment, I think, some days.
Good days, bad days. Happens to everyone.
Right.
Senator Parker. Senator Perry, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Joint Resolution 75.
Thank you, Mr. President. SJR 75 is the follow-up to the SB 28, constitutionally dedicating the money that will be transferred in there for the funds. Joint resolution allows the Texas voters to decide the use of money for water infrastructure and supply. With that, I move to suspend the regular order of business.
Any objection? Hearing none. Rules suspended. Chair lays out in second reading. Committee substitute for SJR 75. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee substitute SJR 75, proposing a constitutional amendment creating the Texas Water Fund to assist in financing water projects.
There is an amendment, members. Secretary will read the amendment.
For amendment number 1 by Perry.
You're recognized on your amendment, Senator Perry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this amendment aligns the joint resolution with the standard language. It is a technical correction to make sure that the bill does not count against Article 8 spending cap.
Any objection? Hearing none. The amendment is adopted. Members, the following amendment. The Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 2 by Perry.
You're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Amendment number 2 is recommendations from the comptroller to align with the statute, that Senate Bill 28 that we just passed.
Any objection? Hearing none. Make sure it's all the way to the back row. Any objection? Hearing none. Amendment is adopted. You're now recognized. Passage to engrossment.
Move passage to engrossment.
Any objection? Hearing none. Bill passed to engrossment. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Move to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt,
31 ayes, no nays. Rule suspended. Chair lays out third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for SJR 75. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute SJR 75, proposing a constitutional amendment creating the Texas Water Fund to assist in financing water projects.
You're recognized on final passage.
Move final passage.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
31 ayes and no nays. It's a $1 billion day.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator. Great work. Members, we are getting ready to conclude floor action for the day. I know committees need to resume meeting. Chair lays out the following resolution. The Secretary will read the resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 39 by Whitmire, resolving that each House grant the other permission to adjourn for more than 3 days during the period beginning on Thursday, April 6th, and ending on Tuesday, April 11, 2023.
You're recognized, Senator, to explain the resolution.
Thank you, sir. Members, this is our 3-day constitutional required rule. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 39 allows us to actually adjourn Thursday, April 6, 2023, ending on Tuesday, April 11, 2023. I so move.
Secretary, call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell.
31 ayes, no nays. The resolution is adopted. The President's desk is clear. Are there announcements, members? Senator Betancourt for announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder to the members that the Local Government Committee will reconvene 15 to 30 minutes upon adjournment after a couple committees vote simultaneously, I might add, that I have to be in. So we'll see you there in 15 to 30 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the 24-hour posting rules so that the Senate Committee on Finance can meet in the Senate Press Room 2E9 to vote on pending business today, April 3rd, immediately upon adjournment.
Thank you. Senator Creighton. Oh, is there objection to the motion? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. Senator Creighton for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the 24-hour posting rule so that the Senate Subcommittee on Higher Education can meet today, April 3rd, upon recess of Senate Finance in the Senate Press Room 2E9 to consider pending business. So the Senate Subcommittee on Higher Education will meet just after Senate Finance in room 2E9. Thank you, Mr. President, members.
Yeah, you need to do a time certain.
$5:20.
5:20. All right. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. Senator Creighton. Senator Hughes for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Committee on State Affairs will reconvene. We stood in recess this afternoon to allow the Senate to come in, and State Affairs Committee will reconvene at 5:15 here in the chamber. State Affairs 5:15 back here in the chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the Dean of the Senate for a highly privileged motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate adjourn until 11 a.m. Tuesday, April 4th, and do so in memory of Deputy Darren Almendarez, a constituent of Senator Alvarado. Thank you, sir.
Any objection? Hearing none, the Senate stands adjourned until 11 a.m. Tuesday, April 4th.